why do you think that now, after all these years, we're seeing this come back up? Especially from CNN of all places. Do you have any thoughts on that, Tanya?
I do. I mean, I don't think anything from the Oklahoma City bombing is aging well. There's a lot more information out there that has managed to keep resurfacing over and over and over the years. It goes in cycles maybe, but I mean, it's still alive and kicking.
Hey, it's Jose Galison. You're watching No Way Jose. Today I'm joined by Jonathan Franklin. This has been a long time coming. I've been meaning to talk to him for a while. He interviewed McVey and kind of covered the Oklahoma City bombing back in the day. It's done a lot of interesting work, and so I'm looking forward to talking to him. But before we get into that, guys, let's pay the bills a little bit. I want to remind you guys that today's episode is brought to you by Nadeau Shave Co. If you're tired of the razor burn, irritation, and ingrown hairs caused by those deep penetrating multi-blade cartridges, then this is the way to go. Go back to traditional shave. You can shave just like your grandpa used to. Whether you're shaving your whole face or just edging up your beard, the single blades give you a barber grade shave for a fraction of the price. The standard issue includes one traditional safety razor as pictured here with a box of 100 stainless steel razor blades. $75 allows you to shave for an entire year. Let's be real, it completely depends on how frequently you shave. I've had it well over a year. I barely put a dent into it. I only edge up here and there, maybe shave once a month. So it really depends on how you frequently use it. But if you are someone who shaves regularly, you may want to consider the Quarter Shave Club. That'll put you about 25 cents per replacement blade. He also has 3-in-1 body, hair, and face soaps as well. Also a shave soap. Highly recommend those. Smell great. Feel great. It's a COVID mandate refusing company. Use code Jose for 10% off your entire order. Support those that support your values and support me. So appreciate Nadeau for sponsoring this episode. Love Nadeau. All right, let's go ahead and get Jonathan in here and get to it. What is up, Jonathan? How you doing?
Really good, thanks. I've been a huge fan of the show, and I think it's just really amazing that, as I said, or I thought the other day, there's only probably 50 to 100 people in the world that are obsessed with the McVey case, and thanks to shows like this and Wendy Painting and Richard Booth, and it's really interesting how it becomes exponential. 1 + 1 + 1 becomes 10.
Mm-hmm. And it keeps on going and going. Real quick shout out. Here's one of my patrons, Tim Tuttle. He's actually the one who made that intro. He said, "Let's go." He's been looking forward to this as well. Real quick before we get into kind of the conversation at hand, this is the first time on the show for you. So, I think we'll probably kind of talk about this topic a little bit, about stuff you've done and different stories you covered and stuff, but just kind of right off the bat, just kind of a general introduction of yourself. If you could give one for yourself to the audience, I'm not so presumptuous to try to do it for you, but if you could just give them a quick idea of who you are, what you're about, kind of work you've done in the past, and kind of just what drives you and, things of that like.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, no, I'm an investigative reporter. I'm 61 years old, so I've been doing this for about 44 years. Come up on a half century of investigative reporting, everything New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, The Guardian. I've been covering Latin America for almost 30 years, mainly the drug wars. But back when I was in the States, which was the 80s and the 90s, I was doing quite a bit of work on the extreme right. I shaved my head and worked on Pat Buchanan's campaign. I was his advance man for a presidential campaign. I'm originally from New Hampshire, so I actually I know a bit about the primaries and all that. I joined Operation Rescue, helped blocking up an abortion clinic, and then inside the prison interviewed Randy Terry, but at the time was head of Operation Rescue. I don't know. I think I'm always just doubtful of hearing things firsthand, secondhand. And so I always like to watch things firsthand. So during the Gulf War, I got an idea that I didn't really believe that the casualty reports coming out of the Pentagon. Basically, there was 300,000 troops in the Gulf. This is like 90, 91. And they basically every day it was like 2 sprained ankles and 1 guy had an upset stomach. And I was like, maybe not. So I went to a place called San Francisco School for the Dead, and I told them that I was a Hollywood actor and I was going to be a mortician in a movie, and how could I better portray a mortician? And they thanked me and said, you never refer to the body, you say the remains, and they taught me a lot. And then I went to Georgetown University and studied on being a mortician, and I read a whole year of American Funeral Home Director. And then I called up the U.S. Air Force and told them I was an out of luck mortician. Could I work inside their top secret Dover Air Force Base? And then they hired me to go inside and embalm the soldiers coming back. And that's when I realized that there was a huge cover up. There was, I was in a room with 50, 60, 70 bodies, and the official count was way lower. So I did a pretty big story about, the military saying at the time there's 100 deaths and they're all training accidents. And I'm really realizing from being in the morgue that they're all blown to pieces. And I want to make an interesting point here, I think, is that I would never blame a military commander for misleading the press. I think that's kind of the duty of a good military commander. Like if I'm a Marine commander and I'm trying to take out a bridge, why the heck would I tell the press anything? So I think that people are really stupid when they think that a military commander has any sort of loyalty to the press. His loyalty is get the mission done with as few casualties as possible. So I think that people in the United States are often very naive to this. Jose, you were in the armed services for 11 years. You know this more than most. But so I think that it's really stupid to criticize the Pentagon or the military for doing this. That's what they're supposed to do. Our job as the press is to find that line about what is correct and what's morally right. And there's times for operational security where I don't publish a lot of things. I could have gotten people hurt. And so I don't think there's any clear line of what a good investigative journalist does or doesn't do. But for me, I never expect the military to tell me their secrets. I mean, that would be just poor leadership on their part. But I do believe that we often get lied to by the military. So I did do a bunch of stories such as this, where I went to Panama right after the invasion of Panama in 1989. Same thing, discovered some friendly fire incidents. So I've been doing a lot of things and then I went down to South America and joined up with a lot of military units and joined them as they took out and bombed and did some pretty horrible things to the narcos down in Colombia and Mexico and Nicaragua and Guatemala and all those places. So I think I've been around a bit. I've been living outside the US for 30 years now, working as a reporter. So I think that gives me an interesting ability to both be American, but look at America with a different point of view.
Yeah, we were talking before. You were saying you were in Chile right now. I mean, not to dox you, but it's a whole country, so I think we're okay.
Everybody knows I'm Chile. I live in Chile. I've got 7 daughters here. My full-time job is taking care of 7 daughters. Like my journalism is like what I do to make sure they all have bicycles and braces.
Yeah, that's an insane stat. 7 daughters. I have 2. Those are my only 2 kids. I have a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old, or a 12-year-old. And I don't know. 7's insane. But I mean, kudos to you. But I guess let's go. Well, let's go ahead and get into the topic, the Oklahoma City bombing. I guess to just kind of start off with. I guess I'd be interested in what your introduction into the story was. Like, when did you first start covering it? I'm assuming it probably wasn't. I mean, I don't know if you saw the thumbnail for this episode. I put the man who interviewed McVey. That's kind of like the interesting tidbit here. I mean, not to say there's the rest isn't interesting, but that's like the draw. You know what I mean? And that is quite a distinct thing for a reporter to be able to say. I don't know how many reporters interviewed him or journalists or whatever term you prefer. But I mean, I assume it can't be too many. So that's you're among an elite group essentially. So I mean, I guess before we get into that, I get just kind of like, what was your entrance into the story? Had you been doing any sort of coverage before that, or did you just kind of get this big break and land McVey off the bat?
Well, I think my first introduction to the story was April, like probably most of us, was April 19th. I was living in San Francisco, California at the time. I was in a hospital, and I saw, must have been 10 o'clock in the morning. I just saw this wreckage and this bomb, and we, like any journalist, was just flabbergasted and curious. And then within about 2 or 3 days, a fax came out. First of all, McVey gets named within probably 3 days or so. And he said he was a Gulf War veteran. And because I had like infiltrated the Air Force a bit, I'd done these stories on casualties, and I knew that there was probably a lot more to the Gulf War story. I immediately decided to focus on that route, because I thought, what if he had killed before? What if this was not the first time he had killed? What if maybe he got medals the first time he killed? Is there anything there? And it was a bit of a hypothesis, which it proved to be correct. But at the time, I just thought that this wasn't an electrician. This wasn't a janitor. This was a person who had been trained in some extremely powerful weapons, include the Bradley fighting vehicle, which people mistakenly call a tank, but it's basically an armored personnel carrier with some pretty serious firepower on the roof. And McVeigh was a gunner, and I realized pretty quickly that he was an exceptional soldier, and he was with a unit called the Big Red One, and he had been based at Fort Riley, which can't be more heartland than Fort Riley, which is in Kansas. So I very quickly realized that there might be a way to go out to Fort Riley and go to his old base and start poking around, like reporters are supposed to do. And so that's exactly what I did. I flew out to Hutchinson, Kansas, and I went to Fort Riley. And my way of reporting these things is I usually go to the tattoo bars and the strip bars, and the bars at 3 a.m. and just start poking around.
All right, cool. I guess before we get into that, I do have a patron question. This is from John Klebold, the individual who made the intro. He said, what was the general vibe of McVeigh and the process of trying to interview him? I figured that was a good time to insert that here. So just what was your feeling interviewing him, and what was your process going into it? I know we talked before, and you'd said you weren't able to bring a recorder, so you had to bring notes. So obviously you probably had to make accommodations to your normal process. So I'm just kind of interested in hear that.
I had multiple interviews with him. I had one in person and then many written interviews where I would write. He became kind of like my pen pal. Like I would write him questions, and he would handwrite the answers, and then his lawyers would type them up. So at first the vibe was complete confusion, because on one hand he had definitely done this completely evil thing of blowing up a daycare center. He was definitely involved. We can later talk about if he's the mastermind or the fall guy, but he was definitely involved. 168 people are killed, but he's clearly extremely intelligent in all sorts of ways. From you could just tell that the vocabulary he used, talking to people who knew him well. He scored perfect scores on the Bradley Gunner test. 1,000. He loved being a soldier. He's the guy who used to buy Armorall with his own money and shine the wheels of the Bradley, so that when the brass came by, they would all cheer him for being such a good soldier. So on the one hand, he was called the perfect soldier by some of his colleagues, and he was extremely well spoken. And so I kind of wanted him to be like a crazed maniac. And the more I talked to him, the more I got to know him, I really thought that if I met this guy at a bar, I would have been cracking up with him. He was extremely well spoken. He was not self-centered in a way. He was able to view the world in a way that showed that he had an ability to take in massive amounts of information, digest it, spit it back out. So it was a little bit disconcerting, because I wanted to see a monster, and I kind of found a guy who, if I had met in other circumstances, I probably would have played hoops with or something.
Yeah, I mean, it is going through Wendy Painting's book. You do realize like what an odd figure he is. Like just going through his past, the things he's done. I mean, yeah, what did he come on the Fed's radar as like a kid at one point? I think he tried to hack something or something bizarre. I forget. I mean, it seems every one of these type of people, there's always some sort of they were on the Fed radar when they were a kid, and you're like, how is this even possible? I mean, I guess just weird coincidences. But it does.
Al had Commodore 64s.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, though, it more speaks to his intelligence. He clearly was somebody who was a little bit smarter than the average bear. I guess I'm kind of curious. How did you even land that interview? Was that a matter of some sort of whoever you were, the individuals you were working for at the time, or was it just something you just kind of put your foot forward and just kind of went for it? I know a lot of times in life, people don't realize that a lot of times you just do stuff, say, hey, I want to do this, and you just put your foot forward and start doing things. Sometimes they just happen. A lot of people think you have to have other people open the door for you, where sometimes you just, ask, like, hey, can I do this? And then they'll be like, okay, sure. So I don't know what the process would be to interview, America's Satan at the time.
The process was, is that you can't really impress somebody like this unless you've got some exclusive information, because the guy must be getting 100 interview requests a day from CNN to down. And I'm just freelancer Jonathan Franklin working for Playboy. And also then I did a bunch of articles for Spin magazine. So what I did is I went out to his army base and I found his old room. And I went to his old room and started interviewing people on base. And I got the names of all the people that were in his tank during the Gulf War. So now I call it a tank, the Bradley fighting vehicle. And there was about 6 people there. There was a driver, a dismount leader, some infantry troops. And so before I even approached McVeigh, I started interviewing all those folks. And that really helped, because I realized that my goal was to paint a picture of McVeigh at war. I wasn't going to focus 100% on the bombing yet. I first wanted to say, when he was put in a stressful combat situation, did he kill anybody? What was his mission? Did he enter the war with the same mentality that he left it with? I wasn't trying to do pop psychology, but I do think that when people are put in combat, it can do all sorts of things to your mind, both good and bad, and it can be a band of brothers, or it can be PTSD for life. So I thought, I can only investigate one sliver of his life. So I decided to investigate his military sliver. And that allowed me to understand things like, during the Gulf War, he had been clever enough to wire up their tank with soundtracks. And he was playing, Bad Company. He found very early on in the Gulf War, he found a pet kangaroo, or he found a kangaroo rat, which he turned into a pet. So he's going to war with blasting Bad Company with his little pet kangaroo rat. So when I start to get close to asking for an interview, one of my first questions I say to him is, what was the name of your pet kangaroo rat? And he's like, what the fuck? How do you know about the pet kangaroo rat? And I was like, Jesus told me. And he goes, Jesus? And I was like, I went out to Seattle and I hung out with Jesus, who was the driver, and so I immediately jumped forward like 7 levels of confidence by asking this kind of question that very few people in the world knew, that he had a pet kangaroo rat, and then asking for the name. So I wouldn't call it a left hook, but it was definitely, I came in with a surprise question. And so that broke the ice. And then his lawyer said that they would give me the interview if I could get him a copy of an underground magazine. And this underground magazine was being put out by Special Forces soldiers. I believe it was called The Resistor. I might be wrong on that. It's been a while. And so this was an underground magazine, active duty Special Forces troops. This is the early 1993, 94, 95. Active duty Special Forces troops were calling for the overthrow of the US government. Not a common thing. And they actually had their own magazine. And in their magazine, they were calling for an uprising. And McVeigh said that if I could get him the latest copy of the magazine, he would give me an interview. So I had to go searching for this. And some shady dude who I think was either a CIA, FBI plant named Lawrence Myers, who was running, I think he was running intel on us journalists the whole time. But he seemed to know quite a bit about the bombing plots. And this guy, when I mentioned that I needed a copy of this magazine, he gave it to me for some reason. So then I was able to give it to the lawyers for McVeigh in exchange for I asked for 2 things. I asked for McVeigh interview and for his Pentagon file. And to my surprise, I think I was the only reporter to get most of his Pentagon file. And what that had was, it had all his awards for the members of his unit, and next to each member of his unit with the award was a social security number. So then I hired a private detective to track down all those people. So all of a sudden now I was able to get like a look at 20 or 25 people in his company through the list of Bronze Stars or Purple Hearts or Combat Achievement Awards or whatever they were called. So I very early on, I had a list of the people closest to him at war, and that allowed me to frame my questions, to understand. So by the time I actually go into El Reno, the prison, to interview McVeigh, I know a lot.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious what it was. What were your takeaways from his views on the military? Because that was one of the things when I was reading Wendy Painting's book that really caught my eye. Because or ear, or whatever you want to say. But for me, I found myself identifying with it because I mean, as you mentioned before, I was prior military. I'm no longer. I mean, I did 11, which a lot of people go, "Why do you only do 11?" And you're like, "Well, because I mean, like,
Only
yeah."
11.
Well, I mean, because the reason is you get 20 and you're a pension. You get 50% of your base pay for the rest of your life. So
it's 9 years. It's 9 more years of your life.
yeah, exactly. It's 9 more years of my life, but most people are like, yeah, you're halfway there. But for me, it really was. I mean, it was multiple things. It wasn't just this. I'm to some extent, I'm a pragmatic person, and I have a family, and things can be done. So like, I'm not entirely ideological to my detriment, or to a degree I don't feel like I can handle. But there was a part of me that's just like, I like well over half of my time in there. I was not on board. I just was not. I don't believe in anything we're doing overseas. I believe we do far more harm than good. I just don't. I struggle to see why we do the things we do, and I used to be able to wrap my head around the idea of like, well, we're here as a military, like just in case, and I was able to kind of wrap myself in like constitutional arguments, but you just get to a certain point, you're like, I'm part of the problem. I mean, there's no way for me to work around it. I am the one doing this. It's like you can't use the Nuremberg thing. Not to say I was killing people or anything like that, but the idea that like I was told to do it is like, or like I was commanded or whatever. It just doesn't fly. At a certain point, it's like you're a thinking person that makes their own decisions, and you're continuing to input yourself here, and you know what this means. I mean, to be clear, I was just a mechanic. So I know it sounds lofty, but it wasn't like I was like out offing people or nothing. It's just, but I knew I was part of an apparatus that like I worked on planes that were fueled planes that dropped bombs on people, and I didn't agree with any of the things we were in, and I'm by no means a pacifist. Like if someone broke into my house, I would have no qualms whatsoever with doing what needs to be done. If anything, that's kind of the impetus that drove me towards the military, the warrior spirit inside me, which identified very much with McVeigh and the way he was. But he definitely seemed to have similar revelations to me during his time in the Gulf War, and I always found that particularly interesting. Because I don't know, a lot of people use this time to paint him one way or the other. They'll paint him as like a bad guy who did awful things overseas. Or they'll do the opposite and they'll make him sympathetic. I mean, I think people are a little bit more complicated than that. I mean, it is also kind of hard to parse what's true and what's not between the different tales of the individuals overseas. I know there's tales.
So.
You don't think so?
Parse out. No, I think I'm in a pretty good position. I think of all the reporters, I think, I went out to. I'll give you a story. So I go out to Fort Riley. This is. The bombing's in April 19th. This is probably like 2 months after. It's probably like June, so it's still pretty fresh. So I go out to Fort Riley and poke around, find his old room, and knock on the door. And I start. And I was from Playboy, so it was pretty easy to get soldiers to talk to Playboy back then. Playboy doesn't really exist. But in 1995, if you showed up at a military base and said you're a reporter from Playboy, like it was not difficult to get people to get, hey, that sounds cool. Let's talk. And so we went down to like a main room, and I was asking them what's going on. And they said, this is the most screwed up military unit in the entire U.S. Army. We've had shootouts on base. We've had soldiers leaning out, firing shotguns out the windows. We've had suicides. We found bodies here. We found bodies there. They call us the Renegade Brigade. They were just going off. And I was into this for about, I don't know, an hour. And this monster military police guy comes in, MP comes in and is like, dude, there are no reporters allowed on base. You come with me now. So he kicks me off base, and I get my little crappy rental car. And this dude is huge, like big Georgia boy. And we're driving off Fort Riley, and we get pretty close to getting off, and he flips on the lights and pulls me over. I'm like, dude's going to whomp me or something. The guy comes over and he goes, please look at me. I'm a big guy. I am terrified here. This base is out of control. I will help you. Come back tomorrow and I'll give you disciplinary records. I came back the next day. The guy gave me all these military files and all the crap going on base. So there was clearly something like, this was not your functioning smooth unit. This was a chaotic situation where McVeigh had left several years before. So he wasn't necessarily involved in any of these suicides or shootings, but it was indicative that this unit was having a terrible reputation. Soldiers were literally shooting each other. And I think that if you go backwards and if you look at the people, and some of those people had known McVeigh, they were still in the Big Red One. and I must have interviewed 25, 30 soldiers in his company. I don't think too many reporters did that. And really, he was an exceptional soldier. He killed a few Iraqis. Some people say that you're not supposed to use a high explosive round on a human. He was being shot at by bad guys from far away who were in a trench. You know, he's being shot at. It's not like he was picking off civilians. You know, he was under fire and he used the weapon that was most appropriate and basically blew some guy's head off from 1,600 meters. He might have shot some surrendering Iraqis. I think it's really Monday morning quarterbacking to talk about trench warfare and the rules of engagement when he's not in a tank. He's in a lightly armored vehicle. He's taking fire. I think it's kind of hard for us to sit here in our comfortable couches and say, oh yeah, maybe he should have, shot a flare and warned them first. So I don't really think there's much to war crimes. He may have killed some surrendering people, but I think that it's really easy for us to judge. But what was most interesting to me is that he was involved in a very horrible operation where they buried alive some 2,000 Iraqis. And what they did was they took the M1 Abrams tank, and they realized that hand-to-hand combat in trenches was not going to be could be very successful, but it was going to be bloody. So it was actually more efficient to turn the M1 into a big bulldozer. I don't know where they got the plow, but they took the plow off something else, attached it to the Abrams, and so they would just go down the trench and they would just fill in it with sand. And there was some 2,000, maybe 700. The figures range from 700 to 2,000. But Newsday magazine, I think, won a Pulitzer for this. They buried alive, hundreds and hundreds of Iraqis. And McVeigh's job was to mow down the survivors with it. He's got his machine guns, he's got his rockets, he's got a lot. He's got a lot of missiles, and he's got the tow missile, I think, as well. So he. And they were running over people. They called them crunchies, because they would crunch when they ran them over. So I do think that you've got this guy who was told that he was going to die. He was literally the point of the spear. They're told that they're going to be killed probably within 45 seconds to 4 minutes. They are literally cannon fodder, and that doesn't happen, of course. They breeze through, and there's not much resistance, and the Iraqi crack troops are far away from the front lines. The people he's killing are like Palestinian houseboys and Nepalese servants. Saddam threw a bunch of, third-class citizens in the front rows, people who weren't even properly trained. So I think what we really saw here is literally from Monday to Friday, McVeigh goes from being the perfect soldier to stealing MREs and giving them to the survivors, because, he realizes that he's not killing the enemy, he's killing pawns. And then when they're going down the highway of death, which was, basically a traffic jam that got taken out by the AC-130 Warthogs.
It's awful, yeah.
And then they stop short of taking out Saddam. So it's like, okay, so we kill all the peons and we leave. It's like a chessboard. You kill all the pawns and you leave the king and queen alive. Like, I think that really kind of warped, or not even warped. I mean, it opened his eyes, but it completely snapped something about his idea of what America stood for. And I really believe that he came back from that war with a very different point of what America was all about. And, he literally said to me, war will change you. And I think I've never been in war. I don't think you have either, Jose, but I think that it's kind of obvious. But to be told you're going to die, to be sniping people, to see people buried alive, and then you get medals for it. I'm not saying you shouldn't get the medals for it, but he wasn't killing highly trained troops. He was helping kill draftees who were probably nothing to do with the Iraqi army. So I think that it was just a shocking experience. And under almost all the accounts I heard, he performed remarkably well. He didn't lose his cool. He did some remarkable shooting. He was so on the front lines that he actually was part of the bodyguard or security contingent for Schwarzkopf, the general. So I really think that it's, to understand McVeigh, I think there's a bit of a before and after with the Gulf War, and I do think that one of his answers, his written answers to me that his lawyer censored, but that Wendy Painting recently shared with me, because Wendy got the original answers, because I wrote in lots of questions and I would get some answers yes and some no, but it turns out he answered a lot more, and his lawyers wrote, "These are so good, we don't want to tip off the government."
Mm-hmm.
So now Wendy gave them to me a few months ago, and he said, "You would be appalled at what Special Forces is doing." So
Yeah.
I think he more than most members of the military saw some pretty awful things, and I do believe that I do think there's a lot of evidence that he was recruited back into some sort of weird undercover operation that was probably part of PatCon. I can't say 100% that he was part of PatCon. I can't say 100% that he wasn't just maybe he was kind of a random gun lover who was just happened to meet all the exact same targets that I was looking for, and just happened to be like suggesting you steal from military bases, and just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. But I actually think there's a lot more to the story. So
yeah,
I think the most remarkable thing about this is just the amount of information the government continues to deny the American public. And I think that for my generation, this is kind of our Kennedy assassination.
Yeah, it is. It is kind of wild how many key figures in the radical right, or whatever you want to call it at that time, he managed to schmooze up with, or try to schmooze up with, whether it was successful or not. If you look at his call records and such, it is quite wild. But I guess that's you did kind of get me a little bit going. I almost jumped ahead of where I wanted to go, but before we get into it, and I guess this is kind of adjacent to what we're talking about here, and I don't know if you have really any particular insights or not, because I mean, let's be real, me and you are both white guys. I don't know how much insight we're really gonna get talking to McVeigh about his feelings like that. But I'm sure you probably did a little bit of digging. I'm kind of curious, what was your read on that? Because obviously, I know you just are kind of implying that you think he may have been some sort of asset as well. So maybe that was just a play. But I'm just kind of curious. What are your thoughts? Was he really a racist? Was he not? What was your feeling? I mean, obviously you can't know his heart, and at its root, if you're saying he's not a racist, I guess you're kind of in a sense saying that it's all just completely made up and it was all an act. But I'm just kind of, what was your read? Did you feel like there was that bone in him or not? I don't know.
I think he was racist. I disagree a little bit with Richard. I know Richard thinks that he was like white supremacist. I'm not totally convinced of that, because this is my opinion. I'm not no dispersions on Richard, who's done a lot more work on this than I have. But I interviewed members of his military units who were African American, and some said he was run of the mill racist. Some said he wasn't, but his take on this is that it was an extremely racially charged unit, and that McVeigh said that he was racist, but he wasn't hardcore. And I kind of think the Turner Diary things were the cover story in a lot of ways. I don't think he was that much of a hardcore. I think he was a middle of the road racist. I think that he definitely would give African American soldiers bad jobs sometimes. There was definitely some evidence that when he was dealing out duties to people, he would favor the whites. But I don't know. But what also strikes me is the number of people in his unit who said, it was a really racially charged unit, and he wasn't like, his racism didn't stand above the crowd. I'm not saying that's particularly good given 1995, that there probably was all sorts of BS going on, but my opinion is that he was not like a hardcore white supremacist. I think a lot of that was an act. I do think he had day-to-day racism, but just the fact that various African American members of his unit said he didn't treat me racist, he wasn't racist with me. That to me says something. These are people who lived with him, went to war with him. They were working 24/7 with him, whether they're cleaning latrines or cleaning the tank. And so I think it's kind of hard to hire. If you're a white supremacist, I think it's kind of hard to hire. You can't really hide that if you're living 24/7 with people.
Yeah, it is I don't know. I mean, obviously I can't speak to his experience in '95, but I can speak to mine. In the military, and there's the military really is probably one of the biggest hodgepodges of minorities. I don't know how they do it or what the deal is, but at least that was my experience. So it is like, I mean, while I know a lot of people might joke, and I do joke around on online stuff, it is kind of like, I've met people of all different races. They're mostly pretty cool. You're working together. Like, that's probably one of the best things to break down barriers. So I don't know. It sounds to me like, he was just racist enough to be able to dial it up to 10 and really sell the part. But not quite. That was the feeling I kind of got as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's very, very personal opinion, and I might be wrong in that. It could be that either something happened or he hung out with people who were extremely racist, and he became more racist. I mean, all sorts. What's really difficult with Tim McVeigh is to understand what is really Tim McVeigh's true beliefs, and what part of it is an act that he's doing if he is some part of some sort of asset doing undercover work. Because I know that we have the famous pictures of him at Waco. He's sitting on the hood of a car selling bumper stickers. Is he really selling bumper stickers because he's part of the militia movement, or is he gathering intel for God knows whom?
Yeah. All right. Well, I did want to make one quick observation, but I did want to mention, I was thinking about this as we were talking about it, just kind of on the idea of going to war and that sort of stuff. And this kind of speaks to my experience as well. I joined at like 19. So, I mean, I'm dumb. You're young, you're dumb, you just are. Like, I'm 33 now. So it's like, you look back at 19-year-old me, and I was an idiot. And I believe McVeigh was roughly the same thing. I think he went to school for a little while, if I recall correctly. So maybe he was like early 20s. I can't remember exactly how old he was when the Gulf.
He was quite young.
Yeah, he was young. Yeah, so he's 20s. So it's like, I mean, while you are an adult, and to some extent it is like you are responsible for decisions you make, you signed up to go to war, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think any real early 20s, 18, 19-year-old, individual can really fully understand what they're signing up for in that. So, I mean, it is kind of a weird issue there. Another thing I did want to ask, you just said that all those questions, there were a lot that were withheld, and they were the juicy ones, and you said you got them from Wendy recently. Have you published those recently, or is that something you're going to do soon? Because that very much interested me. So
yeah, well, no, nobody's seen them. I mean, Wendy's seen them, but no, and I was reviewing them before the show today. Yeah, we can talk about that, but the thing that most jumped out at me was because it's his handwritten letters, then they get typed up and somewhat edited and chopped down. But the most interesting part I found was, which they never released to me, was you would be shocked by what Special Forces does. And then he starts right and appalled, and then he crosses out appalled. It doesn't quite convince us that he was an asset and he was doing some weird work, but he was officially never in Special Forces. Like, he was, how he knows what Special Forces was doing that's appalling and shocking. It raises more questions than it answers. But I do think that we should revisit some of these questions, because there aren't the amount of original McVeigh materials fairly limited. So if we can add to the record, which more than anything else, this is the American people has to know this. This reminds me of COVID-19, lab leak or not. It's how can we not know these things? Kennedy, they're still screwing us on Kennedy. Oklahoma City bombing. Why can't we see the video surveillance? Who was the other guy in the truck with him that day? Why did a guy in Denver, Colorado, go to a notary public months before and do an affidavit saying there's a plan to blow up the Oklahoma City bombing? I know about it, and if you can never don't charge me with it, because I'm telling you now. I mean, there's just way too many weird things that are not being explained and are being hidden from the American public. Mainly who the heck was in the car with him that day, and why can't we see video surveillance footage? And does the bent rebar suggest more than one explosion? There's just, why does the ATF make this jackass story about guys being trapped in an elevator when if you weren't covering something up, you wouldn't have? Why does Oklahoma City Fire Department get warnings 3 days before? Why? There's just there's obviously a lot more questions than answers, but there's clearly the official story is nowhere near the truth. And I think that it's a real candy moment for my generation. I think that the American public, not to mention every single person who was injured or lost a loved one or a family member, or even worse, a child. How can we not keep trying to figure this out? It's kind of a debt that any journalist who works on these things kind of owes to the broader community. It doesn't matter if Wendy breaks a story, you do, or Richard Booth, or the book that's coming out. I don't think the byline's to the point. The point is that collectively, the 50 of us or so who know the story know that we're being told a crock of shit.
Yeah, which on that, why did McVeigh's sister, well, actually she didn't even say it. McVeigh said it himself. What's the deal with the letter saying that he actually did join the special forces, or I guess you could say he did but didn't. He got out but then became part of black ops of some sort, not technically special forces. For those who aren't aware, I guess just to get a little back up a little bit, he did when he came back from the Gulf War, he went for special forces in the army, and the official narrative is that he failed. So but he did send a letter to his sister saying otherwise. So I'm just kind of, I guess, we already went on this a little bit, but I just don't know if you want to expand on this idea. I mean, we can go full speculation here. Just kind of, seems that you find that credible. I mean, it sounds fantastical. I guess to frame this question a little bit differently, since you already kind of said you found that credible, how far are you willing to give credibility to? Because we've obviously there's the like MK Ultra angles people make, and I have no idea. I don't know. When it comes to that stuff, I always take the position of like, I don't know. I mean, it seems bizarre that he had something ridiculous like 30 plus dental visits in like a year or something nonsense when he was there. There's a lot of other things that suggest some weirdness. I mean, if you do follow his time after the military, it seems very bizarre. I mean, there's that incident he had at his grandpa's house where he seemed like manic and out of it. So there's a lot to suggest maybe there is something in the MK Ultra angle. I mean, like I was just reading today on my morning show, going into Operation or Project Bluebird, and how God, I forgot what the heck I was saying, but in Bluebird, God, I forgot what I was going to say. I don't know.
This is how far I'll go. I mean, look, I think that in these kind of cases, and I'm sorry I keep referring to COVID-19, but I don't think in some ways, for example, COVID-19, I'm not sure if it matters so much whether it was a lab leak or whether it's an animal. It's just and with Kennedy, the CIA did it, didn't do it. It's just a basic right to know. It's like, we pay our taxes and we play by the rules. Why shouldn't the government play by the rules too? So I think that it's kind of a basic tenet of living in the United States or being a U.S. citizen, that basic fundamental questions like, who the heck blew up a building that completely changed the political landscape, not to mention the legislative landscape, is worthy of inquiry. And so I think that a lot of times, I think it's more important that we get a real answer than we get the answer we want. Maybe for a conspiracy buff, we might say, of course, there was charges inside the building. And if we were a physics major, we might say, no, there weren't. And if we were another kind of explosives expert, we might say, of course there was. So I think that a lot of these cases, you can argue 5 different ways what actually happened. But the basic facts are that there's a massive cover-up of 10 or 15 basic tranches of basic information the American public deserve to know. And our grandchildren will probably know. But like, why do we have to wait for our grandchildren to die and come to heaven and tell us about it? Like, can't we know now? And I do think that I'm more interested in getting the documents, talking to the people, and then letting you, the public and colleagues, hash it out. Like, I don't have an agenda here. Like, I don't, it's not that I don't care, but that's not my job to play moral police here. My job is to find the documents or talk to get myself 60, 80 minutes with McVeigh, get him to write me letters. My job is to, get a spade and turn over some dirt and see what we find. And so I think that when we look at the official narrative, there's just so many basic things that are being taken from us that you can't help but say, why wouldn't you show the surveillance footage? Why wouldn't you name who got out of the truck that day? Why wouldn't you, get to the bottom of why the ATF wasn't there that day? Why did the Oklahoma City Fire Department get a warning? They're just some pretty basic questions, and I think it's a real shame, and it's a black eye for the U.S. media that it takes people on the edge paying their own way doing this. This should have been like 10-part series in 60 minutes if we had a real hardcore press. And I understand that there's all sorts of corporate control and there's all sorts of careers on the line, but I do think that there's just way too much basic information is being withheld, and it's been so many years now, and it's a real disgrace to the American to the common sense of the American people, that they aren't given this information and they have to fight tooth and nail for it. You've got somebody like Jesse Trentadue, who probably had other things he wished he'd been doing the last 30 years of his life than recreating, the related death of his brother. And, I went down a lot of rabbit holes here, and some of them got dirt and some of them I got gold. And, I went to prison. I interviewed Peter Langan, spent a lot of time talking to Peter Langan, who was, the leader of the Aryan Republican Army. I went to Elham City. I went there and talked to Millar. I drove up there and started walking around Elham City, interviewing people. I think, as reporters, our job is to dig and throw it into this collective, wisdom of what we know. And, Wendy's done a great job. Richard's done a great job. Cash's done a great job. Roger Charles, I'm probably missing about 50 other people, but really, I think that it's kind of imperative that we provide this information to the American public so that they can make the decisions. And I'm not sure how far I'll go down with he was part of a sting operation, but there was all sorts of weird crap going on that night. And, was McVeigh the driver? Everything I know about the guy says he doesn't have the makeup for the mastermind. He's a good soldier. But even the mixing of the bomb, even the shaping of the charges, even putting in the extra nitromethane or whatever it's called, there's just a lot of things that it's just not like you go on YouTube and find the video how to do this. To this day we haven't been told what the detonator was. What they actually used to detonate it. So I think that it's very clear that we've only got about a third of the story, and the third of the story we got was a big cover story that the press swallowed and said, "Oh my God, white supremacist freak blows up little kids." That's not the story.
Yeah. No, I do think the time is now. We're almost at 30 years, and we saw the intro at the beginning. That was for those who aren't aware, I interviewed Tanya Yiki a while back, who pretty famous for the Google Terrence Yiki. I've also covered it plenty on my show, but we were talking about the CNN article, and so even CNN has got the point. And don't get me wrong, I have qualms of CNN. Thomas Lake seems pretty good. I have kind of like inside info from the behind the scenes, and it's I believe he actually was wanting to do more too, like other stories. So I think that was just I'm assuming the one he probably was able to get through. So it seems like a good guy at like a network that I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to get you to talk crap about CNN. I was very surprised to see such a good article come out of there. I was like, whoa. And it's just also coming from such a large, kind of corporate entity, that much truth. You're like, whoa, maybe the time really is now. You just said something a second ago that really kind of got me going. I'm reading Ham's book right now, Bad Company, which the main thing, the main bit in that for the listeners there, I'm not going to assume you guys have read it, but we've already referenced John Doe 2. John Doe 2 is probably one of the most famous aspects of the Oklahoma City bombing. It's pretty clear there was a John Doe 2. It doesn't take much digging into it to realize there is. But now the thesis of Ham's book is that it wasn't just a John Doe 2. There were multiple John Doe 2s. And I'm kind of buying into it more and more the more I read it. And so it's almost as if the idea of a John Doe 2 itself was a bit of a smokescreen in the idea of that, like, well, it wasn't one John Doe 2. And it wasn't even, I don't even think it was one McVeigh. Which sounds insane, but when you do read Ham's book and you realize the methodology of the ARRA, how they were going about doing things, you're like, oh, that kind of makes sense. They would use disguise as decoys, make this person look like that person, and that could be something that would very much confuse, people looking into it later after the fact. Tim Tuttle, accurately pointed out Oswald in Mexico. I mean, Oswald had the same phenomenon that happened with him, where there were multiple Oswalds going out and about. But I guess just the kind of crux of the issue is I'm kind of curious, just general thoughts on the ARRA side of things. Are you kind of partial to the multiple John Doe 2 theory? And I guess I'd also kind of like to know some insights from Langan, because he is such a interesting character. He is such an odd character.
Well, in John Doe 2, I think actually they should be called like John Doe 2, 3, and 4, and 5, because I think that if we were able to actually really open up the magic file cabinet and pull out what actually really happened in the months leading up to the Oklahoma City bombing, I think we would find all sorts of provocateurs, maybe on the government payroll, maybe not. There's all sorts of people that want to just, screw things up for whatever reasons. So I think it's clear that there was a nucleus of key planners who are still at large, and whether they were working on a sting operation that went bad, or they had their own nefarious reasons for wanting to kill American civilians, I have no idea what their motivations were, because we haven't gotten that far. But very clearly, if we could actually go back in time and sit in on some of the planning meetings, there's at least 4 or 5 very key figures who were never arrested. So I think the whole idea of John Doe 2 is a bit of a whitewash, because it should be John Doe's 2, 3, 4, and 5, and we have the guy at the rent. We have a guy at the rental counter. We have a guy at the strip club. We have a guy, whoever it was, getting out of the truck that morning. There was clearly a coterie of very important and people with military style bearing around McVeigh in the weeks and months up to the bombing. So he's clearly involved with some kind of professional, maybe they're saboteurs, we could call them, or dark ops people. But some people, this is not McVeigh, Commander McVeigh. He never showed that kind of leadership in any aspect of his life. Even as a salesman at the gun shows, he was kind of like, it was almost like, pitiful, in the sense he had like 4 copies of like a couple racist books and a couple guns and some magazines. Like, it was, it points much more to a flimsy cover story than it does to a devout white supremacist, in my opinion. And so I think that when you look at the ARRA, what you see is a fairly sophisticated MO. I think in the, let's call it the 21 robberies or so, I don't think they ever fired a single shot, which is kind of remarkable. And the ARRA clearly has massive government infiltration. Scott, one of the guys, Scott, was actually, the feds confirmed that he was in witness protection. Yeah, or one of them, no, was it him?
No.
Okay. One of them went into witness protection afterwards. Bank robbers don't get witness protection. One of the members, McCarthy, I think Kevin McCarthy went into witness protection. It's very clear that the feds are all over this. I mean, the only reason Richard Guthrie gets out of jail, Langan gets out of jail, is to track down Guthrie. Langan's in like Georgia jail for like robbing a Pizza Hut or something, and the Secret Service springs them and says, like, go find this guy, and he kind of double crosses them and joins up with Guthrie, and there's a lot of history there. But what's really interesting about Peter Langan is he grew up in Vietnam, and his dad, I believe, was a case officer, and he talked about having like leaders of the Vietnamese government in his house. He talked about Buddhist monks like lighting themselves on fire outside his daddy's office. He's a very weird child of the 60s, in that he saw Vietnam like nobody else. I mean, it's very hard for any of us to imagine like our dad's a top CIA or spook in Vietnam, and they're meeting like the coup plotters here and the coup plotters there. And so,
I think his dad was basically a coup plotter, which is what makes it nuts. They were playing with like dignitaries' kids and stuff there, and the next thing you know, his dad orchestrated like their parents dying and stuff. And now there's
right. So like, so the chance of this guy coming out with like, a solid moral base is pretty much impossible. Extremely intelligent, pathological liar. I think the problem with Peter Langan is that it's like all good spycraft, 10% is true and 90% is BS, but the BS is so skillfully wound around that 10% of kernel of truth that as a journalist you could actually go insane, like trying to figure out what he's lying about, what he's not lying about. But there are things we can look at. I've got copies of I'm not sure if you've seen them, but the ARRA propaganda videos with Commander Pedro or whatever they called themselves. But this was an operation that had definitely had federal agents, in and around it. And whether or not it was directly tied to the Oklahoma City bombing, I can't say. I've got my doubts, and I'm not sure if it was. But McVeigh does tell his sister that here's some $100 bills from the bank robberies. He tells somebody else they've been robbing banks. Within 3 days of the bombing, the FBI is looking, at their fingerprints from all the bomb rob stuff. So. Yep. I think that there's there's a chance that there's an overlap here of infiltrators. You know, in a lot of ways, this is very much like the Whitmer case, like the Gretchen Whitmer como supposedly assassination plot, like where there's 6 dudes in a car and 5 of them are recording the one guy who can't figure out how to take a left turn without help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is wild. Man, there's so much that I want to dig into here. I just don't even really know where to start. Geez, I get. Sorry, what'd you say? We had a little delay there.
Go for it. No, I think there's a lot of threads here. We'll get to some, and maybe we'll get to them all. But I do think that this is a really important story for not just for the victims and for the closure for them, but it literally exploded our political landscape. A bomb in the Midwest, shattered our innocence. Ushered in. It was really, it was like kind of like a Woodstock of terrorism. It changed. Like there's a before and after.
Yeah, I guess I want to refocus back in on Pete Langan real quick because I just can't help but not. You said you kind of was like a pathological liar. I just want to see if maybe I could get you to pull a little bit more of insight, or if you had any insights on Pete, because, or I guess Donna now, if we're going to be polite.
Yes.
For those who aren't aware, he was like, I believe one of the first transgender people to try either. I don't know if he actually was successful in getting.
No, but we can call him Pete because he was Pete at the time we're talking about.
Okay.
Him, I think.
Yeah, fair enough. Not that I'm overly worried about it, but I don't know, just to be polite, I guess, why not? It also is just kind of an interesting aside for those who aren't aware that, like, yeah, this guy is what I believe either one of the first or one of the first to attempt to get sex transition while he's in prison. Yeah.
For the sex change operation while in federal custody.
Yeah.
But I call him Pete when he's Pete, and I'll call him Donna when he's Donna.
Yeah, but anyway, what I wanted to ask is, like, he is one of the characters that, like, you really, really, really are like, is this guy? You almost like, especially when you first get the breakdown of him from someone and you haven't actually dug into his story, you're like, this guy is clearly some sort of glowy federal agent, whatever your asset, whatever you want to call it. But then the more you dig into him, you're like, I don't know. I mean, I kind of, when I first started digging into his story, reading Ham's book, like getting more into it, because obviously I knew the broad strokes before that, but then when you start digging in, you start like learning like all about his life growing up. You're like, I don't know. I mean, his dad was CIA. It looks like his dad was involved in coups, may or may not have been involved in Operation Phoenix. He then later becomes an informant for the Secret Service to sell out his ARRA buddies, essentially throws them the bird and decides not to and just does his own thing anyways. So it's like there's so many different elements in there. You're like, at broad strokes wise, you look at it, you're like, I think this guy is some sort of asset. But then when you dig into it, you're like, I don't know. I'm not really seeing it. But I mean, maybe I'm missing something.
I don't think
he
was an asset. I think he was like a wannabe Che Guevara.
Okay.
I think that he has a huge ego, which is part of the reason he's always giving. He talked to the press a lot. He was always any excuse to get out of prison and go to court and make some outlandish statement. I mean, he's kind of between like an actor, like a frustrated actor, or frustrated Che Guevara, or Subcomandante Marcos. Like, I think that he actually, as a child, was watching the world stage. I mean, literally, like, things in his living room would later become front page, stories in the New York Times. So I think that he was living history, and I think my take is that he. And I don't think I'm anywhere near the most qualified person to make these kind of judgments. It's just my opinion, but I do think that he had delusions or ambitions of grandeur, and which is why his bank robberies are much about the show as they are the money, because they're not getting much money. A lot of times you're getting $5,000, $8,000. I think in 21 bank robberies, I think the total was like $250,000.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if you really wanted to get the money, you'd like take out one armored car, Aryan nations would go after armored car trucks to get $2 million each, at a shot.
Yeah, where I'm at in the book, they still haven't pulled off an armored car robbery. They keep saying they're going to, and I'm like, I don't think they're going to at this point. I'm pretty sure they don't. So,
I don't think Pete. I don't think he was an asset. I think he flipped on the Secret Service when they pulled him out to get Guthrie. I think him and Guthrie saw an opportunity, and I think he really. He wanted a stage, and I think being a flamboyant bank robber. I mean, he was already in prison with like like robbing a Pizza Hut. Who the fuck robs a Pizza Hut or something? Like, what are you
Right,
gonna get? Like $400? I mean, like you're not thinking big when you rob a Pizza Hut. But so he got kind of a second lease on life by getting sprung by the Secret Service, and then asked to go take down these other guys. So I think the whole ARRA thing was, it was like his show. I think he was destined to end up in the federal penitentiary for one thing or another. So I don't see him as an asset. I see him as a guy who loved the spotlight. Probably would have been a great actor, and just he just balls to the wall. Like he just went for it, and he was probably already facing serious time in Georgia for, I think it was armed robbery at the Pizza Hut or wherever it was. So he was probably facing pretty serious time for an armed robbery in Georgia for something like that. I think he had a bit of a record anyway. So I think that he just kind of, like a shooting star, decided to go out in style and just went, 21 bank robberies. I mean, like $8,000. I mean, you're splitting it among 5 guys, I mean, like, and they spend like, but they did, they did the whole thing, which was very showy. Like they would like write letters to the FBI, the individual FBI agents who were chasing them. They would, leave. They would do it. They would wear like, presidential Bill Clinton masks. They would do these kind of Easter basket with a bomb in it. It was like, it was kind of like half, I don't know, half Sesame Street and half Hawaii Five-0. I don't get it. There's a lot of show to it.
Yeah, and a fun little aside: the inert bombs that they would use frequently at their robberies was kind of a trademark. They would use an inert bomb to essentially delay the police, cause them to have to bring in the bomb squad, all the like, cause pandemonium, whatever, to secure their exit. It's a very common thing you see now. Where I'm not saying that it's every time there's an inert bomb, it's some sort of op or something, but it is. Anytime you see fishy things, it's not that uncommon. Where it's like some sort of inert bomb. Like what did we have the thing before J6 or whatever with the inert bombs as well? I had Kyle Seraphin on Forever Go to cover that. I got Tim Teller here. He says the wildest thing about Langan is he witnessed the monk self-immolating from the building his dad had him staying at. Yeah, we mentioned that aside. But yeah.
He was like 8-year-old kid or something. I mean, he was like, that's got to affect you. I mean, somebody just committed suicide, and even an 8-year-old might be able to figure out it has a little bit to do with what daddy does.
Yeah, and then we got murder, death, kill, which is quite the name here. Steal cars and put registration and names of the agents investigating bomb rob. Yeah, that is another thing they were doing. And then also got the same guy said 30 years ago around now. ATF informant Carol Howe was doing one of many dry runs / rehearsals with others unknown. Yes, for those who aren't aware, she went, I believe it was either 2 or 3 times she claimed to have visited the Murrah Federal Building with Dennis Mahon and Andreas Strassmeyer, who Andreas Strassmeyer is probably, of all the characters, aside from Roger Moore, he's probably the most obvious asset of some sort, aside from Roger Moore. Roger Moore is just basically like, you can just say he is, pretty much. There's not really any, so much argument.
What's interesting is Roger is more like on the intel side rather than law enforcement, whereas Strassmeyer was probably working for, he probably came in under State Department, but he was, I would say that Strassmeyer is more likely working under DOJ, because State Department gets him some weird visa, but the Texas Light Infantry Brigade started to get suspicious of Strassmeyer because he was asking all sorts of weird questions, and then they follow him, and he uses a keypad to go into a secure federal building, so they kick him out. So it's pretty clear that this guy had some serious federal connections. His car gets pulled over and confiscated, and everybody from the governor of, I think it was either Oklahoma or Missouri, is calling. You've got people from Fort Bragg calling. I mean, he clearly he's royalty in West Germany. I think his father was the first chancellor after the wall went down. So he was this would almost be like a Cheney or some other American dynasty. So he comes from an extremely powerful German family. When he's spirited out of the country, it's German commandos that meet him in Mexico. It's David Holloway, a U.S. Special Forces guy who smuggles him out of the country. And Rick Strassmeyer is up to his ears in this, and somehow nobody in the federal government has any interest in talking to him, because God knows if he starts talking, it's going to blow the cover on them. So I think that, Carol Howe, who is one of the least recognized victims of this whole thing, because when she starts to tell the truth, they bring all these bogus charges on her, and thank God that she had some very good lawyers and actually had the money to defend herself. I think she came from a fairly well-off family, so she was actually able to pay for a really solid legal defense. But Carol Howe got put through the ringer. I mean, they did everything they could to silence her and imprison her and frame her. And, if you ever have a doubt about what it's like to see the vengeance, Carol Howe is a pretty good case, because she was telling Angela Finney, I think it was, her ATF handler, the shit's going to go down. They're talking about blowing stuff up. And, and so ATF wants to do a raid, and I think it was the FBI that calls it off.
Yeah, didn't they charge her with something like having explosives or some sort of paraphernalia she wasn't supposed to have, supposedly? But these were things she had acquired in her capacity as an informant. I believe, if I recall correctly, that was. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I don't know if you remember offhand, but I
no, there was something. Yeah, I don't want to go on the record exactly. I can't remember what it is, but it was pretty clear in her as her attorneys showed in court that it was trumped up charges, and it was all evidence points to this being just a vengeance campaign to try and shut her up. And I wouldn't say she had her life ruined, but she was an extremely brave person. She's one of those of every 100 people, whether they be ATF agents who were on the scene, whether they're firefighters who knew about the warning, for every 100 people who knew beforehand that something was going down, she was one of the few to speak up. She risked her life. She went undercover for the feds. She went to dangerous white supremacist camp in Elohim City, reported it, went back in after the bombing. And then what do they do to her? They tell her to shut up, or they're going to, lock her up. So I think that, it's because of people like her, and there's only a handful who were brave enough to break the silence. Harvey Weathers, who was the dispatcher for the Oklahoma Fire Department, same thing. But these are few and far between, and these are the people. This is why we know even what we know is because there's decent Americans who are saying, "Hey, a bunch of people just got blown up in my hometown, and we have a right to know this."
I got Meowry here who says Ham recounts a visit to Pete Peters Church in LaPorte, Colorado. Any insights to that connection? I don't know if I don't remember a character named Pete Peter. I'm assuming you meant Langan. I don't know if this rings a bell to you. I don't recall any of this about visiting Pete Peters Church. Although I don't know.
Sorry, I don't think there's certain things I know a lot about Langan, and there's a lot of things I know nothing. So unfortunately, I can't refer to that incident or that information.
Okay, well, all right. Well, I guess one last thing before we move on from Oklahoma City bombing. Is there anything particular that you didn't cover that you wanted to, or you felt like we should before we move on? Because I did kind of want to talk a little bit about your other work, but I don't know if maybe there's something, fire that I missed. Essentially, I mean, obviously, your writing career better than I do, so maybe there's something here that you might want to bring up that I forgot. So here's your opportunity. Otherwise, I mean, we did talk about a lot. So I mean, we probably could do another hour, but I'm trying to respect your time and not get too much into the nitnoid details for the audience.
Yeah, no, I just think I'll repeat myself again. I think the McVeigh case is so undervalued as a window into the way history can be manipulated. And I think whether it's the press, whether it's the government, whether it's the public, taking the first version of it, it should be taught in every 7th grade history class of like, this is what I told you and this is what actually happened. So I think that you can't overemphasize how important it is for the American people to understand what actually happened that day. And I'm not saying I'm going to break this case, and I hope somebody else does, and I'll be the first to applaud. But I do think that collectively, anybody who's interested in this should, dig a little more, ask the right questions. It's going to come out. It's just like, are we going to have to wait till our grandchildren, tell us?
Yeah, it might end up being that way. Hopefully not. Hopefully we'll get more information here soon. Today you actually, I was watching a documentary that you worked on recently. I found it particularly interesting. I didn't realize there was a monkey laundering issue. That the title took me for a loop, and I'm like, what do you mean laundering? I guess I'm kind of, what got you into that? I mean, that was a bizarre angle, a bizarre thing to go into. Are you a bleeding heart animal person, or was it just something that caught your ear?
I risked my life a lot covering the narco wars for like 10 years, and it was really exciting because you're in helicopters, you're with armed dudes, you're like going to the Colombian jungle. Like the missions were to find clandestine coke labs, land the helicopters, go in and blow up the coke labs and this and that. So it was, it's kind of exciting stuff, but it was totally useless because, nothing changes, and I realized I was risking my life, for adrenaline. I got a bunch of kids. And so about 2 years ago, I said to my kids, hey, look, I'm not risking my lives for narcos, but I will risk my lives for animals. So I started to focus the same skills that I think I have from writing about organized crime. I started to apply to the supply chain of animal traffickers. So I'm doing a whole series for Bloomberg on what is the clandestine supply chain for, let's say, somebody who's killing rhinos in South Africa and smuggling the horns to Hong Kong, or people who are catching wild monkeys in Cambodia and then smuggling them to legal brokers in Miami, or who are the detectives, what I call the green detectives, who are taking down these wildlife syndicates. So I'm going to spend like another year or so doing my little part to see what are the successful ways that law enforcement can take down wildlife traffickers. And so this story called Monkey Laundering looks at how during the COVID crisis, there was a huge need for research monkeys, and the price went from like $3,000 to $30,000 for each monkey. And probably most of you don't know this, but the US needs about 1,000 monkeys a week for all these pharmaceutical experiments, which the monkeys don't usually survive. So there became like this huge black market for monkeys, and it turns out that what you could do is you could pay people to go into the national parks of Cambodia, scoop up the wild monkeys, tattoo a fake ID on them, give them a little fake name tag, and then sell them as captive bred, clean monkeys with no diseases, no zoonotic risks. So what happened is that these big companies were buying up tens of thousands of monkeys that have herpes. They have all sorts of other diseases that can seriously affect the U.S. population. It could be monkeypox. I mean, if we look at a lot of the diseases that are coming out, even Ebola, a lot of these things came from primates. So my story, and we did a documentary on this, was about how we can track big pharma's addiction to smuggling monkeys.
Yeah. Well, all right, I guess this is a kind of a boilerplate question to give you, just kind of on your way out. But I mean, is with all the different eclectic things you've covered, I'm actually genuinely interested in this question. What was your favorite or most meaningful story that you believe you've covered? And then I guess we'll let you get out of here. Respect your time. So it looks like they're trying to grab you back to the party.
Yeah, the meaningful one. Most meaningful. Actually, I'd say I think kind of like maybe it's because the latest. But what was interesting is when we did our monkey documentary, which only came out a few weeks ago. Immediately in Vietnam, they started to crack down on the illegal monkey farms. I thought, well, that's pretty cool. Like, imagine one article probably means that 500 monkeys didn't get whipped into some cage, or entire troops of monkeys. I think this. A lot of times when you do a story, you're not really sure if it has any impact. But when you can actually see, like, Article A leads to government crackdown, and that, I thought that was pretty positive. And I think the other story that kind of really hit me too is I went to Venezuela, and I went camping with 5 hitmen, and I lived with them for 4 or 5 days up in the mountains outside of Caracas. And I did this story called Camping with Killers, which was like profiling 5 young hitmen about how it is that you get into the hitman life, and who trains you, and what's your life expectancy. And it was kind of terrifying and kind of fascinating, because at the same time, I was pretty sure they wouldn't kill me, but they would wake up in the morning, they'd cook me and the photographer breakfast. Wake up in the morning to, like, they're making us like fresh arepas, which are like fried dough, and making us what they call gangster coffee, where they have a big pot of like this big, and they put the coffee grounds on it, and then they put a fork in the coals, and they just throw the hot fork into the coffee, and all the grounds sink, and you've got your perfect coffee. And it was like such a surreal underworld to be living with these hitmen, and we just videotape them and get them to confess to what it was like. And I think none of them would live to be 30. I think one of them was killed just 2 days after we lived with them. So it was quite an experience. But I think that hitman really stood with me, because on one hand they were just kids, on the other hand they were hardcore killers, and they've been trained by adults who totally manipulated them, and they had no sense of what they were doing, and that was kind of a deep dive into the human psyche.
Yeah, sounds pretty dark. All right, but real quick before we get out of here, I know not that it really. Miari said this was on page 209 in Bad Company. I'm only bringing this up because I'm pretty sure that's like right where I'm at. I'm a couple pages before that, so I'm probably gonna get to that soon. I'll keep a mental note of it, and I'll see what you're talking about. Yeah, Jonathan, it was a pleasure having you on the show. I don't know if there's any sort of plugs or anything you want to do at this point, but if you want to let people know where they can find you or where they can find your work, now would be the time to do so.
I'm pretty much like anti-social media. Like I kind of think that that journalists aren't a product. I know that we're all supposed to be like marketing the heck out of ourselves, but I kind of think like, cream floats. So I think if there's one thing I'd recommend is I wrote a book called 438 Days, which is a true story of a fisherman from Mexico, and he goes out for 2 days to catch some sharks. Big storm comes, loses his motor. The dude ends up drifting in a tiny little boat for 14 months, and he washes up in the Marshall Islands. And this is a story that it's resilience on steroids. Even the Navy SEALs who I interviewed said, our guys wouldn't have survived this. So if you know anybody who's been through trauma, if you know people who need a helping hand, like I've had people who've had heart surgery write me, I've had people who are in prison write me. It's called 438 Days, and it's a pretty remarkable story of a fisherman who never finished first grade, couldn't read, couldn't write, but pulled off this remarkable psychological feat of A, not going crazy, and B, figuring out how to feed himself as he drifted for 14 months across the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, that is wild. Well, it was a pleasure having you, Jonathan. We're going to let you go. I'd be happy to have you on again at some point. I found you incredibly interesting and your work. But for those who want to support what I'm doing, you can do that over at patreon.com/nowayjose2020. This episode itself was, if you're watching this when the general public watches it, this was out about a week ago. There's people in the live chat right now that I've been bringing up. Those are my patrons, so I appreciate you guys. The low level of $2 allows you to be able to be here for these live streams, get these about a week early. Also on my weekly live stream with Austin Picard, you are able to come up on the video chat portion, the second half of the show. You can come in and talk to us, be one of the faces on the screen. The highest levels of my sponsors, I read them off every episode as a thanks. I have Toad, my co-host on Tower Gang, at Tower Gang Toad. I also have at AbrogateDees, at ZOVERACK, then at _Infinite Zeal. Jacob Daniel, the Biblical Anarchy Podcast. You can follow him at Biblical Anarchy. Then Tim Tuttle at Jolly Island Klebold. He's the one that made that dope intro at the beginning. Then Will Bell makes a delicious blueberry rabbit eye wine. And then big fan of the show, at Real Josh Elliott. Then Torrin May as well. I appreciate you guys supporting me, making it so I can do what I do and keep on doing it. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Leave good reviews on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to stuff. With that, guys, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. I appreciate your time, Jonathan. This was a blast. I've been looking forward to this for a while. And we're out of here. Bye, everybody.
No, thank you, man. It's a great. No, you're doing great. You're doing great work, and multiply this by 100, because this is how we get the truth out. Drop by drop. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. And then from Yara, interesting conversation. Thanks, guys. Thank you, everybody. And we're out of here.